In today's investigation, we examine one of the most sophisticated smuggling networks ever uncovered in the United Kingdom, an operation that moved staggering quantities of Class A drugs into Britain while supplying some of the country's most powerful organised crime groups. At the centre of it all was a man known in criminal circles as the Big Fella, Paul Green. For years, this network operated almost invisibly. Shipments crossed borders weekly. Millions were generated. Alliances were formed with major underworld figures. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Behind the scenes, it was anything but. This is the story of how Paul Green built a transportation empire for Britain's criminal underworld, and how careless mistakes, international cooperation, and encrypted phone data eventually brought it crashing down. Welcome to Truth Unraveled, where we expose the hidden operations, the masterminds, and the investigations that bring Britain's most dangerous criminals to justice. This is the story they tried to keep buried. Let's uncover the truth. Before he was known as Paul Green, he had lived under other names. Born Simon Swift, he later became James Russell, and eventually changed his identity again to Paul Green shortly before his arrest. Despite these changes, he had no previous criminal convictions under any of those names. On the surface, Green appeared to be a legitimate businessman. He owned hairdressing salons, he ran cleaning companies, he understood tax systems, VAT numbers, write-offs, and corporate filings. He knew how to structure a business so that it looked clean, compliant, and profitable, even when very little real profit existed. Those skills made him valuable. Over time, Green built relationships in the business world. Some of those contacts were legitimate entrepreneurs. Others were deeply embedded in organized crime. He would advise them casually, over drinks, in meetings, during social gatherings, about how to structure companies, reduce tax exposure, and create paper trails that looked convincing. He became trusted. Criminal associates began seeing him not as a gangster, but as something more useful, a strategist. And that is often far more dangerous. At the time, various criminal groups were already smuggling small quantities of Class A drugs into the UK. The profits were enormous. The demand was constant. The risk, however, was high, especially at the border. Green noticed something. The real vulnerability wasn't sourcing the drugs. It wasn't finding buyers. There were always buyers. The problem was transportation and legitimacy, how to move product into the UK without drawing suspicion, and how to distance the organizers from the physical shipments. Green realized something critical. New companies attract attention. Established ones do not. So instead of creating fresh shell companies from scratch, he began purchasing existing businesses. Companies with trading histories, VAT registrations, and paperwork that already looked credible. With funding from organized crime groups, Green started acquiring businesses almost like someone playing Monopoly in real life. Once purchased, those companies would be stripped, repurposed, or used to create convincing documentation for international shipments. On paper, everything appeared lawful. In reality, those companies were being used as cover for industrial-scale drug transportation. With a small trusted circle, including his right-hand man Stephen Martin, Green expanded operations. Warehouses were rented in Sheffield, Leeds, Preston, and Warrington. Shipments began moving consistently. The concealment methods were simple but effective. Drugs were hidden inside legitimate consignments. Onions, garlic, ginger, strong-smelling produce that masked scent detection. Innocent haulage companies were contracted to transport goods from the Netherlands into the UK, unaware that they were being used to move illegal cargo. The operation ran smoothly for years. Green became known as the go-to man for transporting product across borders. Criminal groups trusted him because he wasn't directly tied to any single gang. He acted as a middleman, dependable, business-minded, detached. That detachment gave him power, and the nickname started spreading: the big fella. In the criminal world, recognition can be dangerous. As many law enforcement officers say, once you're known by a nickname, your anonymity is fading. The first serious disruption came in February 2016. A shipment containing more than 8 kilograms of Class A drugs, valued at nearly £1 million, had been concealed inside boxes of ginger, loaded into a cargo van bound for the UK. But something went wrong. The driver tasked with collecting and delivering the load became suspicious. Something didn't feel right. He contacted police. The shipment was intercepted. For the first time, authorities had a tangible piece of the operation. But it didn't stop there. Just weeks later, on March 29, 2016, another shipment was arranged. This time, approximately £1.1 million worth of Class A drugs were hidden inside bottles of what appeared to be cosmetic cream, transported as base oil. Dutch authorities were already watching closely. Two individuals connected to Green's network, Russell Leonard, who spoke fluent Dutch, and an associate, were responsible for overseeing the transport. Incredibly, the pair made a decision that would become infamous in court. They left the van, loaded with drugs, unattended while they went out drinking. In a rare recorded conversation, Green reportedly warned that if the van disappeared or police intervened, there would be severe consequences. When Leonard and his associate finally returned and attempted to move the vehicle, they were immediately stopped by armed Dutch police. A trained dog quickly detected the concealed drugs. Russell Leonard would later receive a 24-year prison sentence. It was an expensive night out. For Green, the arrests were a warning, but not a stopping point. Instead of retreating, he adapted. Companies previously used were abandoned. Funds were moved. Paper trails were cut. He changed his name again. By 2017, operations were running once more, using newly acquired businesses. Shipments increased. At times, the network organized up to 4 transports per week. Even as seizures occurred and arrests were made, the structure allowed for rapid replacement. If one company was exposed, another took its place. New criminal clients emerged, some of them major figures in Britain's underworld. One such name connected to broader criminal networks during this era was John Kinsella, who would later be shot dead in 2018 during a gang feud coordinated through encrypted communication devices. The underworld was shifting, and encrypted technology was becoming central to its operations. In 2017, Green's organization began developing a new transport route by strengthening ties with a Dutch criminal group led by Barbara Rimbos and Johan Vester. Their role was to secure supply and assist with movement across the Netherlands before the shipments entered Britain. By early 2018, Green's crew attempted another significant import: 8 kilograms of Class A drugs, again worth nearly £1 million, using a front company linked to a legitimate business in Truro, Cornwall. This time, Dutch police and the UK's National Crime Agency were working together. The shipment was seized. The Dutch gang members were arrested. Barbara Rimbos would later receive an 18-year sentence, while Johan Vester was sentenced to 20 years after extradition. The network was beginning to unravel. After losing their Dutch intermediaries, Green's group attempted to maintain operations by renting a warehouse in the northern Netherlands. Further shipments were concealed inside cardboard boxes filled with ginger and routed toward warehouses in Bolton, Wigan, and Sheffield. But 2018 proved disastrous. Authorities intercepted approximately 450 kilograms of Class A drugs and 2 tons of Class B drugs across 3 separate seizures. The scale was enormous, and the National Crime Agency was closing in. Green would change his name once more in 2019, but this time it was too late. The net was tightening. By 2018, the pressure was mounting. The National Crime Agency had begun connecting seizures across multiple regions. Dutch authorities were sharing intelligence. Surveillance was active. Warehouses had been identified. Front companies were being examined. But what ultimately transformed the investigation was technology, and the criminals' faith in it. Across Europe, organized crime groups had adopted encrypted communication devices, most notably EncroChat. These phones were marketed as ultra-secure. Messages could be wiped remotely. Devices could be destroyed instantly. Conversations were believed to be untouchable. They were expensive, thousands for the handset, plus subscription fees every 6 months. But to those operating at the highest levels of drug trafficking, the cost was minor compared to the protection they believed it offered. Green's wider network and many of his criminal clients were using EncroChat devices regularly. Interestingly, Paul Green himself reportedly remained cautious. He did not fully trust encrypted platforms. He preferred face-to-face meetings and avoided revealing identifying information. On EncroChat, he used the alias Duck Farmer. He never openly used his real name, but others did. In June 2020, EncroChat users across Europe received a shocking message. The system had been compromised. They were told to immediately dispose of their devices. It was too late. French investigators, working on separate cartel investigations, had successfully infiltrated the encryption network. Millions of messages were captured, detailing shipments, drop-off locations, financial arrangements, violence, and murders. The encrypted world had been exposed. For the National Crime Agency, this was a turning point. Messages from criminal groups who had purchased shipments transported by Green's network revealed critical details. Company names, locations, nicknames, warehouse references. The big fella kept appearing. It was enough to intensify surveillance and begin dismantling the paper structures shielding the operation. The strength of Green's operation had always been its corporate appearance. Established businesses, VAT numbers, documentation, invoices, delivery manifests. But financial investigators began pulling at threads. Front companies with names resembling produce wholesalers, such as Potfresh, Blackpool Fruit and Veg, and Europroduce, were identified. Legitimate haulage firms had been contacted by these businesses to transport what appeared to be ordinary consignments of food goods. Inside those loads were concealed narcotics. One detail became particularly striking: the volume of onions. The network was purchasing between 40 and 50 tons of onions every week. There was no legitimate market explanation for such quantities. In many cases, the onions were shipped back to the continent or found discarded and rotting. The onions themselves became a trail. The NCA began tracing shipments, linking consignments, and mapping routes between the Netherlands and multiple UK warehouses. The cover loads had become evidence. In 2019, after years of investigation, the operation reached its decisive moment. In the early hours of a morning raid, officers surrounded Paul Green's home in Cheshire. Footage later released by authorities showed him being escorted from his property by officers in a quiet cul-de-sac in Widnes. Inside the property, officers recovered nearly £10,000 in cash. Financial records painted a stark contrast between declared income and lifestyle. Green and his wife had spent over £26,000 on watches and jewellery within a 6-month period. Between 2013 and 2018, more than £1.5 million had passed through accounts linked to Green and his partner. Yet his declared profits from legitimate businesses were modest, just over £7,000 in one tax year and around £17,000 the next. The disparity was obvious. Investigators also arrested other key members of the network in coordinated operations. Among them was Mohammed Oris, identified as a principal organizer of front companies. When arrested, he was found with substantial cash and luxury items, including high-end vehicles parked at his property. The network was collapsing. The case that followed would become one of the longest trials in British legal history. 2 separate proceedings were required, one lasting 23 months, another 9 months. The complexity of the case was extraordinary. International evidence, encrypted communications, financial records, surveillance logs, seized shipments weighing hundreds of kilograms. Judge Paul Lawton addressed the defendants with blunt clarity. He described the scale and sophistication of the operation, crediting the National Crime Agency and Dutch authorities for their persistence and cooperation. He emphasized that what the group distributed was not simply contraband, but addiction, suffering, and in some cases, death. The court found that the network had facilitated organized crime on a national scale. The cumulative prison sentences handed down would total more than 200 years. Paul Green, the man known as the Big Fella, received a 32-year prison sentence. At 59 years old, it is widely regarded as effectively a life sentence. Stephen Martin, who had changed his name from Stephen Walker and acted as a financial operator within the network, was sentenced to 28 years. Mohammed Owais received 27 years for organizing front companies and overseeing logistics. Russell Leonard, whose night out in 2016 proved so costly, was sentenced to 24 years. Alan Sin, involved in coordinating shipments, received 21 years. Oliver Penter, who had hands-on responsibility in the Netherlands for concealing drugs in cover loads, was sentenced to 24 years. Irfan Hussain, who managed warehouses in Leeds and Sheffield and helped process shipments and dispose of cover loads, received 4 years. Dutch crime boss Johan Vester received 20 years. Barbara Rimbos was sentenced to 18 years. Several others received suspended sentences or awaited further proceedings. One individual connected to the network died before sentencing. Rob Jones, Director of General Operations at the National Crime Agency, later commented on the wider implications. He stated that without networks like Green's, there would be fewer county lines operations, fewer turf wars, and fewer young people exploited to distribute drugs. The transportation link from source country to British towns and cities was critical. Green and his associates were not street dealers. They were facilitators, enablers, infrastructure. They moved product at industrial scale. And industrial scale crime leaves industrial scale damage. Looking back, several factors contributed to the collapse. The 2016 van seizure in the Netherlands drew early attention. The partnership with Dutch criminal groups exposed new vulnerabilities. The massive seizures in 2018 revealed the true scale of the operation. The overwhelming purchase of onions created a physical trail. And then there was EncroChat. Though Green himself remained cautious about encrypted devices, the broader ecosystem of criminals relied on them heavily. Once the encryption was breached, years of hidden communication surfaced overnight. Perhaps most damaging of all was the financial contradiction. Green presented himself as a successful company director, driving expensive vehicles and wearing luxury watches. Yet his tax returns showed modest earnings. That imbalance opened the door for proceeds of crime investigations targeting assets. The paper trail he had mastered for so long ultimately became the roadmap investigators used to dismantle his empire. As some investigators have said, criminals may try to hide behind paperwork, aliases, and technology, but they always leave a trail. For Paul Green, that trail began with a seized van in 2016. It ended with a 32-year prison sentence, and one of Britain's most sophisticated smuggling operations reduced to evidence boxes in a courtroom. If you found this investigation insightful, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into Britain's most shocking criminal cases. Let us know in the comments. Do you think Paul Green would have avoided capture if EncroChat had never been cracked?